Hello family, welcome to our channel. The Battle of Kursk, fought in July and August of 1943, stands as one of the most significant engagements of World War II, marking a decisive turning point on the Eastern Front. It was not just a massive military confrontation, but a battle of wills between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, a clash that would determine the future trajectory of the war. The battle, particularly known for being the largest tank engagement in history, was the last major offensive that Germany would launch on the Eastern Front, and its outcome sealed the fate of the Nazi regime. Before we start, please take a few seconds and subscribe to this channel for more of global insights. In the aftermath of the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, Adolf Hitler was desperate to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht, though still a formidable force, had been severely weakened by the losses sustained in the winter of 1942-43. Despite this, Hitler believed that a decisive victory could reverse German fortunes and stabilize the front. The focal point of this renewed German effort was a bulge in the Soviet lines around the city of Kursk, known as the Kursk salient. This area, stretching approximately 200 kilometers, 124 miles, from north to south, and 150 kilometers, 93 miles, from east to west, jutted into the German lines, creating a vulnerable position that Hitler hoped to exploit. Hitler's plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, aimed to encircle and destroy the Soviet forces within the Kursk salient. The operation was meticulously planned, with the Germans amassing a significant concentration of men, tanks and aircraft in preparation for the assault. The Germans brought in nearly 900,000 troops, around 2,700 tanks and over 2,000 aircraft, including their latest models like the Panther and Tiger tanks, which were intended to spearhead the attack. Hitler believed that this powerful armoured force would break through the Soviet defences and allow the Wehrmacht to regain strategic momentum. However, the Soviets were not caught unprepared. Soviet intelligence, bolstered by information from British codebreakers and other sources, had accurately predicted the German plan. The Soviet High Command, led by Joseph Stalin and his top generals, including Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky, decided to turn the German plan into an opportunity for a defensive victory. The Soviet strategy was to absorb the German attack and then launch a counteroffensive that would drive the Germans back. In preparation for the battle, the Soviets constructed a series of elaborate defensive fortifications in and around the Kursk salient. These defences included multiple lines of trenches, extensive minefields, anti-tank ditches and artillery emplacements. Over 300,000 Soviet civilians were mobilised to dig trenches and lay mines, creating a vast network of obstacles designed to slow down and weaken the German advance. The Soviet forces, numbering nearly 1.9 million men, were divided into three fronts. The Central Front under General Konstantin Rokossovsky, the Voronezh Front commanded by General Nikolai Vatutin, and the Steppe Front under General Ivan Konev. These fronts were positioned to defend against the expected German attacks from both the northern and southern flanks of the salient. The battle began on July 5, 1943, with the German forces launching their attack as planned. In the north, Field Marshal Walter Model led the 9th Army in a drive toward Kursk, while in the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein commanded the 4th Panzer Army and elements of Army Detachment Kempf in an attempt to break through toward the city of Oboyan and Prokhorovka. The initial German assaults were met with fierce resistance. The Soviet defences, meticulously prepared, proved to be a formidable obstacle. German units found themselves bogged down in heavily mined areas under constant artillery bombardment and facing well-coordinated Soviet infantry and tank counterattacks. In the northern sector, Model's forces struggled to make significant progress. The 9th Army encountered extensive Soviet fortifications, and despite deploying some of the most advanced armoured vehicles of the time, including the Tiger tanks, the Germans found themselves unable to break through the Soviet lines. The terrain, heavily fortified and dotted with minefields, played to the Soviets' advantage. As the German tanks advanced, they were met with a storm of artillery fire and anti-tank weapons, causing significant losses. Meanwhile, in the southern sector, Manstein's 4th Panzer Army initially made more headway, thanks to a more concentrated use of armoured forces and favourable terrain. The German forces managed to penetrate several of the Soviet defensive lines and appeared to be on the verge of a breakthrough. However, as they pushed deeper into the salient, the Soviet resistance stiffened. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, under the command of General Pavel Rotmistrov, was positioned to deliver a decisive counterattack if the Germans managed to reach the town of Prokhorovka. The Battle of Prokhorovka, which took place on July 12, 1943, became the defining moment of the entire Kursk campaign. This engagement is often remembered as the largest tank battle in history, with nearly 1,000 tanks clashing on a relatively small battlefield. The German 2 SS Panzer Corps, led by General Paul Hauser, spearheaded the attack, aiming to deliver a knockout blow to the Soviet defences. The Germans deployed their most powerful tanks, including the formidable Tigers, in a concentrated effort to smash through the Soviet lines. However, the Soviet commanders had anticipated this move. General Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army launched a preemptive counterattack, sending waves of T-34 tanks into the fray. The Soviet tanks engaged the Germans at close range, neutralizing the technological advantages of the heavier German armour. The battle was chaotic and brutal, with tanks engaging in close-quarters combat, often at point-blank range. The battlefield was soon littered with the wreckage of destroyed tanks, both German and Soviet. Despite the German numerical and technological superiority, the Soviet forces managed to hold their ground. The ferocity of the Soviet resistance and the determination of the Soviet tank crews prevented the Germans from achieving their objectives. By the end of the day, the German advance had been effectively halted. The Germans had suffered significant losses in men and material, and the initiative began to slip away from them. As the battle continued into mid-July, it became increasingly clear that the German offensive was losing momentum. The Soviets, having absorbed the initial German attacks, began to prepare for their counteroffensive. On July 12, 1943, the same day as the Battle of Prokhorovka, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov in the northern sector of the front. This operation aimed to drive the Germans out of the Orel salient, a key position that the Germans had held since their advance in 1941. The Soviet forces, spearheaded by the Western Front and Bryansk Front, launched a series of coordinated attacks that caught the Germans off guard. The Soviet counteroffensive quickly gained momentum. The German forces, already depleted by the fighting around Kursk, were unable to mount an effective defence. By August 5, 1943, the Soviets had recaptured the city of Orel, forcing the Germans into a full retreat. The success of Operation Kutuzov marked the beginning of a broader Soviet advance that would continue to push the Germans westward. In the southern sector, the Soviets launched Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev on August 3, 1943, targeting the German positions around the strategic cities of Belgorod and Kharkov. The Soviet offensive, conducted by the Voronezh and Steppe fronts, aimed to liberate these key cities and deliver a decisive blow to the German forces in the south. The fighting was intense, but the Soviets, buoyed by their success at Kursk and the influx of reinforcements, were able to overwhelm the German defences. Belgorod fell to the Soviets on August 5, 1943, just 2 days after the launch of the offensive. The battle for Kharkov was more protracted, with the Germans mounting a determined defence. However, by August 23, 1943, the Soviets had recaptured Kharkov, effectively ending the German summer offensive. The liberation of Kharkov marked the conclusion of the Battle of Kursk and the beginning of a continuous Soviet advance that would eventually take them to the gates of Berlin. The Battle of Kursk was a decisive Soviet victory, with far-reaching consequences for the rest of the war. The Germans suffered massive losses, with estimates of around 200,000 casualties and the destruction of over 1,000 tanks. The Soviet losses were also heavy, but their ability to replace both men and equipment far outstripped that of the Germans. For the Germans, Kursk marked the end of any realistic hopes of regaining the initiative on the Eastern Front. From this point on, the German forces would be on the defensive, steadily pushed back by the relentless Soviet advance. The significance of the Battle of Kursk cannot be overstated. It was the last major offensive the Germans would launch in the East, and its failure marked a turning point in the war. The Soviet Union had not only defended its territory, but had also demonstrated its growing military might and strategic acumen. The battle also highlighted the importance of intelligence, preparation, and the effective use. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of battle. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from around the world. Until next time, stay curious.